The sound still woke him. Bang, bang, bang. Frank Wilson jerked upright in his narrow prison bunk, sweat slick on his neck, knuckles aching like he had just driven his boot through that door again. The cell was dark, except for the thin strip of hallway light. No cops behind him now, no partners, no captain on the radio, only the echo of his own voice in his head. Police, open up. He pressed the heels of his hands into his eyes, but the pictures would not blur. A door flying inward. A black man on his own floor, hands up. Too calm, too quiet. The first time Frank ever felt like the one being watched. 3 states away on the same night, in a hotel ballroom off the Las Vegas Strip, Brian Davis sat beneath television lights. A plastic nameplate in front of him read, Division Chief Brian Davis, FBI. The metal of the cuff scars on his wrists caught the glow from the cameras every time he lifted his hands. On the screen behind him, the footage rolled without sound. A Henderson driveway at 2 in the morning, officers pounding on a black man's door. The frame shook when the door gave way. Brian's body appeared for a second in the chaos, dragged across his own threshold, shoulders bare, skin against concrete. Gasps whispered through the room, even though everyone had seen this video a dozen times. Older residents from his subdivision sat in the front row, Sunday clothes and tired faces, watching themselves on the screen. Martha Patterson leaned toward the woman beside her and spoke almost in a prayer. That was the night we learned some doors break easier when there is a black family behind them. Brian kept his eyes on the screen. He saw his own face pinned to the hardwood, the moment where rage had flooded his chest and he swallowed it, choosing to breathe instead of scream. He remembered the weight of the officer's knee between his shoulder blades, the way the neighbor's porch lights snapped on one by one like witnesses waking up. The moderator's voice cut. Through the hush, officers pounded on a black man's door at 2 a.m. 5 minutes later, they were the ones surrounded by neighbors, by cameras, by the truth. Back in the cell, Frank swung his legs to the concrete and stared at the painted cinder block wall. Somewhere out there, that video was playing again. Somewhere, people were repeating his name along with words like corruption and abuse. In Henderson, the house on Sunrise Lane had a new door now. Fresh paint, new hardware, cheerful wreath. A young couple lived there with a baby swing on the porch. The crack in the concrete step where the battering ram had slipped was still there if you knew where to look. Every morning on her walk, Martha slowed at that spot. Her foot always paused over the thin white line in the gray. She never stepped on it. She would glance at the door, remember the sound that split the night, and the way the whole country seemed to lean in toward their quiet little street after that. One door kicked off. Its hinges had dragged an entire system into the light. But on the night it happened, Detective Frank Wilson still believed he was the only one in the dark who truly had control. On most evenings, Brian Davis looked exactly like the kind of man no one worried about. Polo shirt, khaki shorts, rubber sandals, hose in hand on a small patch of stubborn grass in front of his Henderson duplex. The sun was sliding down behind the distant strip, painting the stucco houses gold. Garage doors opened and closed. People came home from shifts at McCarran, the hospitals, the casinos that never slept. Evening, Brian? Long day, Martha Patterson called across the street as she wrestled grocery bags from her aging Honda. Her white hair was pinned up, lipstick a little crooked. Same circus, different conference room, he called back, smiling. Client wants a new security system rolled out by Friday. They think software installs faster if they yell at it. She laughed, reassured. In her head, Brian was the divorced IT guy who drove to Phoenix twice a month to see his 12-year-old daughter. Boring, reliable, safe. Inside his kitchen, the details backed that story up. Power bills under his name, a refrigerator crowded with Emma's school photos and soccer schedules, Netflix emails on his laptop, a 24-hour fitness key tag hanging by the door. If you did the paperwork right and waved at the neighbors, Brian had convinced himself, the world was supposed to make room for you. He followed the rules at the bureau, followed the rules in the subdivision, paid his HOA dues on time. Somewhere in that obedience was a quiet prayer. If I do everything right, the system will be there when I need it. Across town, Detective Frank Wilson nursed a whiskey in a casino bar that smelled like stale smoke and old hopes. His suit jacket was off, tie loosened, badge clipped to his belt where the bartender could see it. Captain Miguel Rodriguez sat in the next chair, jacket still on, union pin gleaming on his lapel. "Relax, Frankie," Rodriguez said, folding a stack of casino chips into his palm. "Long as we got each other and the union at our backs, nobody touches us. Politicians talk, reporters bark, then they move on." Wilson believed him. For 20 years, the badge had been his shield and his license. Complaints got buried in process, lawsuits settled, internal affairs steered away from the wrong doors. In his mind, cops were the law. People like the residents of Henderson were background noise. Back in the suburb, Martha sat on her porch swing with a glass of iced tea and a blanket over her knees. She told Brian about seeing 3 cruisers parked outside a casino loading dock that week. Officers laughing with a security manager, envelopes passing hands quicker than she wanted to believe. "I am sure it is nothing," she said quickly, as if she had to take the edge off her own unease. "That kind of thing is on the news. Other cities. Not here. This is a good area." Brian nodded, filing it away. He had heard the same stories from Sarah Johnson in far less friendly tones. Money moving in ways it should not. Names that kept repeating. Wilson, Rodriguez. A map of corruption curling slowly over the city. Yet even as he cataloged every detail, he carried an unspoken faith that he could steer the operation, manage the risk, keep his cover life and his real life from colliding. At roll call one night, Officer Luis Martinez leaned toward Wilson as the squad room emptied. "You notice how many meetings we have had with casino security lately. That is a lot of FaceTime for folks who are just clients." Wilson smirked. "You spend enough years in this town, kid, you learn the difference between business and trouble. Rodriguez knows where the lines are. You focus on your calls." Martinez nodded, but the frown stayed between his brows. His warning slipped off Wilson like water off body armor. It slipped off Brian, too, when he heard a softer version of it from Martha. Both men believed, in different ways, that they still had things under control. That night in Henderson, the sky went navy blue, then black. Porch lights clicked on down the block. Brian rinsed the dinner dishes, wiped the counter, powered down one phone, and locked another in a hidden space behind the bathroom mirror. He checked the deadbolt on the front door, the latch on the back. In the bedroom, he opened a worn paperback of Tom Clancy and stretched out on the bed. Outside, a siren wailed somewhere on Boulder Highway, then faded. Brian turned a page and told himself, like everyone else on Sunrise Lane, that he had done everything right. In Henderson, people believed that if you followed the rules, home was the one place you did not have to be afraid. At 2 in the morning, that belief would meet a dirty boot and a hollow core door and shatter with the first kick. The room behind the off-strip casino kitchen smelled like bleach and old fryer oil. A single buzzing fluorescent light hummed above a scarred metal table. Captain Miguel Rodriguez sat at one end in a pressed white shirt, tie loosened but not still perfect. Detective Frank Wilson dropped into the chair across from him, holster creaking, sleeves rolled up. Rodriguez slid a manila folder across the table with 2 fingers. "Got a problem," he said. "Small one if we handle it early." Wilson flipped it open. A printed driver license photo of Brian Davis looked back at him. Underneath, a Henderson address. A simple line about self-employed technology consultant. Rodriguez watched Wilson's face. "This guy has been poking around," he said, "asking security directors questions they do not like, digging through public records on union accounts. Black consultant from California living in a little duplex like he belongs here, acting like our business is his." Something in the way he said black tightened the air between them. Wilson stared at the photo longer than he needed to. "He is just some IT nerd," Wilson said. "We have 1,000 of them in this valley." "IT nerds do not ask about off-the-books overtime and side contracts," Miguel replied softly. "They do not cross-reference union leadership with casino money flows. He knows where to look. That makes him a problem." Wilson felt heat in his chest. The idea that a stranger, a black outsider from out of state, was tracing lines through his city without permission scraped against every instinct he had. "You want me to bring him in?" he asked. "Bring him downtown. Ask a few questions." Rodriguez shook his head once. "You bring him in. There is a record. Paper trail. People at City Hall start pretending they care. Maybe some reporter in the back of the room remembers his face. I am not asking for that." He leaned back, voice going low. "There are doors you can knock on the polite way," he said. "And there are doors you hit hard enough that whatever curiosity is inside goes quiet. You know which method works faster." Wilson understood. It was not an order, not on paper. That was the point. He could route this through channels, log a formal interview, have a typed-up report. Or he could do what he had done a dozen times in other neighborhoods. Show up late, make it loud, make sure a man understood how small he really was. Across town, in a beige office with no windows at the FBI field building, Sarah Johnson stared at a screen full of movement traces and message logs. A red tag blinked next to one name, Rodriguez. Her encrypted text to Brian was short. Activity around Rodriguez spiking. Multiple meets, increased chatter. Clean sweep timeline is compressing. You may be burned sooner than expected. In Henderson, Brian read it at his kitchen counter. Light from the fridge painting his face. Emma's school photo smiled at him from under a magnet. 47 sworn officers were on his suspect board, their names connected by thin lines of ink and printer paper. He could request extraction tonight. There was a protocol. They could move him to a safe apartment across town, spin a story about a job out of state, quietly shutter the Brian Davis cover life. He could let another agent take the next phase, someone who did not have a 12-year-old girl who already worried every time his number showed up on her phone. He typed, thumb hovering over the send icon. Recommend transition to new asset. Risk level increasing. Then he looked up at the refrigerator, at the soccer schedule he had only managed to attend 2 games from, at the list in his head of how many black men in that city would never have a federal badge between them and a dirty cop. He erased the message, typed again, understood, continuing in place. Will push for complete network map within 48 hours. At the next homeowners association meeting in the community room by the pool, people argued about pet waste and paint colors and neighborhood watch. Someone complained that porch pirates were getting bolder. A younger neighbor pulled out his phone. Just get a Ring doorbell, he said. They do. Half the work for you. Martha sat in her folding chair and nodded slowly. I am too old to be surprised on my own porch, she said. I am going to put one of those cameras right above my door. I want to see who is knocking before I even stand up. Brian smiled politely, taking mental note of how many cameras would now be pointed toward his little slice of sidewalk. Around midnight, the police lot behind the precinct was almost empty. Sodium lights cast everything in a flat orange glow. Wilson leaned against his cruiser and checked his watch. Dispatch chatter crackled lightly over the radio. Routine calls, nothing urgent. He turned the volume down. His phone was warm in his hand as he scrolled past the department contacts and dialed 3 numbers that never showed up on any official roster. Collins, Hayes, Brennan. He told each of them the same thing. Off the books. Just us. A quick visit to Henderson, a man who needed to be reminded that he was asking the wrong questions in the wrong city. No mention of warrants, no call to dispatch to log the stop, no body cams rolling. Near the end of Sunrise Lane, Brian closed his worn Clancy paperback and set it on the nightstand. He checked the alarm on his phone, then powered it down. The encrypted handset went into its hidden compartment behind the mirror, shut away with his badge, his Glock, the life that did not exist on paper here. He walked through the quiet duplex, turned off each lamp with the familiar clicks, and slid the deadbolt on the front door. The house felt settled, contained, under his control. In a parking lot only a few miles away, Wilson holstered his gun, climbed behind the wheel, and clicked his own headlights off for a moment, letting his eyes adjust to the dark. That night, one man believed that staying silent and still would protect an entire federal investigation. The other believed that breaking down a stranger's door would protect an entire corrupt empire. Both of them were wrong. The first hit sounded like a car crash in the hallway. Bang, bang, bang. Brian came out of sleep hard, heart punching against his ribs. For one disoriented second, he was back in some training scenario at Quantico. Then he heard the word that changed everything. Police. Open the door. He was already moving, feet on the floor, brain sorting through a lifetime of videos and headlines. Black man, nighttime, shouting at the door. No time to ask why. No time to argue about rights. Hands first, mouth shut, stay alive. The door exploded inward before he reached it. Wood splinters flew past him in the dim light from the street. Voices crashed into the room. Get on the ground. Now. Hands where I can see them. Brian threw his hands up, palms high, fingers spread, instinct carving through fear. He forced himself to stand still, training and terror braided together in his chest. He knew exactly how many people had died in moments like this because they moved too fast or not fast enough. He also knew there was no warrant taped to that shattered frame. Across the street, Martha Patterson jerked awake to the sound of wood breaking and men shouting. Her heart leaped the way it had the night her husband had his heart attack. She grabbed her phone from the nightstand on reflex, ready to use the flashlight to find her way. Then she heard it. "Get down. Get down on the floor, boy." The last word made her skin crawl. She shuffled to the front window, pulled the curtain back with shaking fingers, and saw inside her neighbor's home as if it were a television screen. Brian, the man who watered his grass and carried her groceries, was on his own floor with 3 uniforms over him. A 4th officer stood in the doorway, shoulders filling the frame like he owned it. "Oh my God," she whispered. For a beat, she froze. "They are the police," she thought. "This must be a mistake. If I go out there, I will just be in the way." Then she heard the tone again, the contempt. "You move 1 inch and I will put you through this floor. You hear me, boy?" Her thumb slid from the flashlight icon to the camera. She hit record without fully deciding to. The red timer started counting up in the corner of the screen. Up and down Sunrise Lane, lights clicked on in front bedrooms. Old men who slept in recliners sat forward. Wives pulled blinds aside with nervous hands. People who had said for years that the bad stories happened in other zip codes found themselves staring at one unfolding under their own porch lights. "Is that Brian?" someone whispered. "That is him. That is his living room. Why are they doing that to him?" They watched him being cuffed on his own floor, Brian's cheek pressed into shattered wood. The smell of splinters and cheap cologne filled his nose. He could taste dust and copper. He was acutely aware of every small thing. The spot on the ceiling he had missed with the paint roller, the family picture of Emma on the wall vibrating in its frame, the rectangle of Martha's window where he knew someone was watching. As a black man, the humiliation cut clean through him. This was every warning his mother had ever given him about being careful, every conversation he had had with Emma about how to act if a cop ever stopped her. All of it happening in the one place he had tried so hard to make boring and safe. As a division chief, he clamped down on the fury. He listened to voices, logged accents, memorized the rhythm of boots on his hardwood. He repeated names when they barked them at each other. Every insult and threat slotted itself into a mental file. Evidence, he reminded himself. If you live through this, every second will matter. Across town on the couch in her small apartment, Rachel Patterson was scrolling through headlines when her phone lit up with a call from her mother. "Mom, it is almost 2 in the morning. They are in Brian's house," Martha blurted out. "The police." They kicked his door in. "They are on top of him. You need to come. You need to see this, Rachel." Before Rachel could answer, a video came through. Grainy, shaky, but clear enough. Her quiet childhood street, squad cars lined up where minivans usually parked. Inside that familiar doorway, a black man who once helped her fix her laptop lay pinned under knees and boots. In the span of 5 minutes, 3 different neighbors hit record. One started a live video, voice whispering over the images. "I do not see a warrant. They just smashed his door and went in. Somebody needs to call somebody. Somebody already had." Dispatchers at 911 began to stack Henderson calls on top of each other. "There are officers beating on a man across the street, and I do not see any paperwork. They kicked his door in. He is not fighting. Why are they still on him? It looks wrong. It looks really wrong." Back in the duplex, a hand yanked Brian up by the cuffs, pain flashing white in his wrists. One of the officers shoved him toward the front of the house. Through his blurred vision, he caught a glimpse of his own. Ring camera, still intact on the siding by the frame. Its small, dark eye faced the yard, where phones glowed in the shadows like a ring of floating stars. They thought they were teaching a lesson to one black man in the middle of the night. In the space of 5 minutes, the street had turned into a circle of witnesses. The next morning, people would rewind that footage and argue on television about who was right. But on Sunrise Lane, in those first stunned minutes, the lesson ran only one way. By the time Brian's chest hit the floor a second time, the story had already left his living room. A teenage boy 2 houses down had his phone up at the window, live streaming through the blinds. At first, it was just 3 sleepy friends watching. "Dude, what is that, cops?" Middle of the night. "That is Brian's place." The view count ticked from 3 to 27, then 112. Comments started dropping faster than the kid could read them. "Where is this? Why are they on him like that? Does he have a weapon? Somebody typed the words "Justice for Brian" with a pound sign in front, half as a joke, half as a reflex. The phrase stuck. Within minutes, #Justice for Brian was crawling across local Twitter feeds and neighborhood Facebook groups that usually argued about trash pickup and school start times. On Rachel Patterson's phone, her mother's shaky video pinged into the same notification stack as those posts. She hit play once, then twice, just to be sure she was seeing what she thought she was seeing. "I'm calling the van," she snapped to the night desk when she got through. "We go live if this is what it looks like." By the time the Channel 8 SUV screeched to a stop at the corner, the front yards were crowded. Martha stood on her lawn in a robe and house shoes, one arm gripping her walker, the other holding her phone out like a shield. Older neighbors hugged sweaters around themselves. Younger ones held their cameras higher, angling for a better shot. Inside the duplex, drawers were open, cushions ripped off the couch. Officer Collins slapped cabinet doors harder than he needed to. Nothing. He has nothing. No dope. No cash. Not even a traffic ticket. Wilson paced between the kitchen and the hallway, jaw tight. "Nobody is that clean," he muttered. "Not in my city." He watched Brian from the corner of his eye. The man's breathing was steady. No begging. No screaming. Just that quiet, infuriating calm of someone who knew too much and was hiding all of it behind the face of a frightened homeowner. Out on the street, the first camera light hit the front of the house. Rachel stepped out of the news truck, hair pulled back, mic in hand. She recognized the address before she recognized the broken door. "Mom," she said under her breath, "this is Brian." Her cameraman lifted the lens. The red tally light blinked on. In a sedan parked 2 blocks away, Special Agent Sarah Johnson watched a different set of lights. A tablet on her lap showed Brian's biometrics in real time, a thin line, tracing his heart rate and respiration. The numbers had spiked when the door went down, then flattened into a pattern she knew very well. "He is controlling it," she said into her headset. That is not good news. That means he knows exactly how bad this is. In her earpiece, a whisper came from another channel. "Martinez." Pinned mic under his vest, voice barely more than a breath. "Wilson is off script," he murmured. "No warrant, no paperwork. He is looking at Brian like he smells fed. And now there is media outside. If they do not find anything, they are going to move him." Sarah closed her eyes for half a second. 18 months of work, 47 dirty names, casino money that crossed state lines and pulled half of Las Vegas into its gravity. All of it perched on the body of one black man in boxer shorts on his own floor. "We can burn the op and extract him," her supervisor had said earlier that week. "Or we can hold a little longer and take the whole tree instead of one rotten branch." Now, the choice was on her shoulders and the clock was ticking. "Stay close," she told Martinez. "Do not do anything that blows your cover unless they put a gun to his head. We are spinning up tactical now." On Sunrise Lane, the questions started to shift. A man in a flannel robe called out from his driveway. "Officer, what is the charge here?" "He did not do anything. We all know him." Another neighbor, clutching her phone, dialed 911 again. "Mom," the dispatcher said with tired patience, "units are already on scene." "They are the ones I'm calling about," the woman shot back. "That is the problem." The words lanced through Wilson even though he could not hear them. He felt the crowd more than he saw it. The pressure of eyes, the glow of screens, the camera light from the news van washing over his back. Rodriguez's voice crackled harsh in his radio. "I am getting reports of media on location," Miguel snapped. "End it. Now. You understand me. Frank, end it, and go to Plan B." Wilson stared at Brian at the neat living room, the perfectly ordinary life spread out in front of him like a taunt. No drugs to display on a table, no gun he could point to in a press conference. Just a lot of clean surfaces and the knowledge that this man had been asking questions about things he had no business touching. "We are done here," he said finally. "Get him up. We will finish the conversation somewhere else." Hands yanked Brian to his feet. The world tilted, then steadied. The porch light was still on. Out beyond it, the cluster of neighbors snapped into focus. He saw fear on their faces. He also saw anger. Martha stepped forward before anyone could stop her, her phone trembling inches from Wilson's face. "Do you have a warrant?" she demanded. "Show me your warrant if you are going to tear apart his house like this." Back inside the sedan, Sarah heard Martinez's heartbeat jump in her headphones. The camera caught everything. Wilson's eyes cutting toward the lens, the flash of annoyance hardening into something uglier. "Step back on your porch, ma'am," he growled, "right now, or I will put you in cuffs for obstruction, and you can ask for paperwork at the station." "You are obstructing his life," she shot back, voice breaking. He did nothing wrong. That clip would end up on national news, looped under headlines about abuse of power and elderly white neighbors who had finally seen enough. In the moment, it only made Wilson more certain he had to get away from this street. They marched Brian down the small concrete path, past the flower bed he had planted to make the HOA happy. He caught Martinez's eye for a flicker of a second. The younger officer's jaw was clenched so tight it looked painful. In the far distance, low at first, Sarah heard the chop of helicopter blades, rotors turning toward the warehouse district on the edge of town. She keyed her mic. "All teams," she said. "Possible movement of asset. Prepare intercept at secondary location. We let them take him off that street, but they do not get to keep him." The van doors slammed shut behind Brian with a hollow boom. The vehicle rolled away from the curb, taillights shrinking as it turned out of Sunrise Lane. Phones stayed up, recording until there was nothing left to see but the empty street and a shattered frame. He was leaving the circle of porch lights and phone screens, the thin protection of witness and outrage, heading into a part of the night where the only eyes on him belonged to men with badges and one federal team racing to catch up. Pier 19 looked like the part of Las Vegas the postcards never show. Rusted chain link, broken streetlights, rows of forgotten warehouses sagging against the dark. The van bounced over a pothole and slowed behind a stack of decommissioned police cruisers left to rot. Doors opened. Cold air rushed in. Hands dragged Brian out by the cuffs, boots scraping gravel. No porch lights here, no neighbors with phones. Just the hum of sodium lamps and the distant thump of a passing freight train. Inside the warehouse, the concrete floor held stains no one had bothered to scrub out completely. Old oil, rust. Something else beneath it all that made the back of Brian's throat tighten. The echo was wrong in here. Too empty. Too practiced. He had read the report about a detective who vanished 6 months earlier after asking the wrong questions about casino accounts. They had never found a body, just rumors about a place on the edge of town where problems got buried without paperwork. "Welcome to Pier 19, Rodriguez said, stepping out of the shadows with a briefcase in his hand and latex gloves already on. "For a consultant, you have caused one hell of a mess." They shoved Brian onto a metal chair in the center of the room. The cuffs cut into his wrists. He could feel every inch of exposed skin in this space full of cold and contempt. "You want to tell us what you have been up to?" Rodriguez asked mildly. "Who you have been talking to? Who is paying you to sniff around our business?" Brian said nothing. Silence was the only card he had left. If he talked too soon, there would be nothing for Sarah to rescue. If he waited too long, there might be nothing left to rescue. Wilson, prowling behind him, kicked the leg of the chair hard enough to make metal scream against concrete. "Look at this," Frank said suddenly. He set a small leather wallet down on the table, something he had just pulled from the hidden space behind the bathroom mirror. After one last sweep through Brian's house, he flipped it open with one finger. The gold and blue of the badge caught the overhead light like a signal flare. Federal Bureau of Investigation. The photo ID beside it was not some contractor credential. It was official, embossed, and under the picture of the man in the chair were words Wilson had not expected to see. Division Chief Brian Davis. Organized Crime Task Force, Southwest Region. Rodriguez stared. For a full second, the room held its breath. "You have got to be kidding." "Me," Wilson whispered. "You let us put hands on a Fed in his own house." "Not just a Fed," Rodriguez said slowly. "You are a division chief. Is that right, Mr. Consultant?" The title did not erase the cuffs or the bruises. It did not make the chair more comfortable or the room less dangerous. If anything, it made the air sharper. Brian saw it in their faces. This was not some civilian they could cow and release. This was a man who could unravel decades of crooked money and quiet deals. Even with a badge that outranked everyone in that room, his life still hinged on the mood of the men with guns. "So what is the play, Chief?" Wilson asked, circling him. "You run around my city pretending to be a nobody. Get yourself into our business. Then what headlines federal hero takes down dirty cops?" Brian looked up at him, blood drying at the corner of his mouth. I ran around your city pretending to be the kind of black man you would never look at twice," he said quietly. That part was the easy cover. The words landed harder than any punch. For a flicker of a moment, Wilson saw the shape of what he had done. Not just assaulting a fellow lawman, but proving every ugly thing people said about badges and black neighborhoods. Rodriguez snapped the briefcase open. The tools inside were neat, clinical, ugly, not just for show. "You know how this works," he said. "You have been in this business long enough. Tell us where the recordings are, where the files are, how much you sent to your people. Make this clean. We can still write a story that makes sense." Brian felt his heart beating under his ribs. Steady, but too fast. On Sarah's screen, miles away, the line spiked again. She knew that rhythm. The one her boss had when a negotiation turned a corner or when he was about to bet everything on one move. Inside the warehouse, Wilson leaned close enough that Brian could smell the same cheap cologne from his living room. "Be honest with me for once," Wilson said. "How long you been taping us long?" "Enough," Brian answered. The first blow knocked his head sideways. It did not surprise him. What did surprise him was the thought that came with it. Not this. Not them. The system is supposed to be on my side. He had spent his whole adult life inside the machinery of American law enforcement, believing that if you stayed within the lines, the machine would back you when it mattered. Sitting cuffed in a chair with a gun pointed at his face by men wearing uniforms, he understood something he should have learned much earlier. The machine does not care who you are. It only cares who is willing to hold the line when everyone else walks past it. Across town, the FBI tactical channel crackled to life in Sarah Johnson's ear. Alpha in position on the north side of Pier 19. Bravo holding south and east. We have eyes on a van and 4 heat signatures inside the structure. Make that at least 7, Sarah said. Rodriguez will not be alone. We do this right, or he disappears, and they rewrite the whole night. Inside the warehouse, Rodriguez's patience thinned. "Last time," he said. "Where is the evidence, Chief Davis? What have you already turned over? You are already in it up to your neck," Brian said. "You just have not seen the paperwork yet." Wilson grabbed the front of his shirt, fist curling. "You think that badge makes you untouchable," he snarled. "Out here, it is our word, not yours." A voice from the doorway cut through his anger like a knife. "Drop it, Frank." Luis Martinez stepped into the circle of light, both hands on his service weapon, barrel leveled not at Brian but at Wilson. His voice was steady. His eyes were not. "Everybody step back from the prisoner," Martinez said. "You are under investigation by the United States government." On the record. For a heartbeat, no one moved. They all knew Martinez. Rookie turned reliable backup. A kid who kept his head down and did what he was told. Wilson laughed once. Sharp. "You lost your mind, kid. Put the gun down before you get yourself killed." Martinez's jaw worked. He keyed something on the radio clipped inside his vest, the motion small but deliberate. "Say hello to the Bureau," he said. "You have been talking to them all night." In every corner of the warehouse, tiny devices that had been quietly recording sent their final bursts of data. Words about money, about unions, about making people disappear, flew through the air to an unmarked van and a bank of servers waiting to catch them. Outside, engines rumbled, doors opened softly. The warehouse district began to fill with shapes that moved like shadows with purpose. Inside, Rodriguez finally understood that the betrayal had not come from some outsider with a laptop, but from a man standing right in front of him in a uniform he had helped pin on. "You wore a wire on me," he said, voice low with disbelief. 18 months, Martinez replied. "You taught me everything I needed to know about what not to become." Sarah's voice rode in over the tactical net. "This is Special Agent Sarah Johnson, FBI. All teams hold until my mark. Targets confirmed inside Building 7. Primary asset is alive and in the chair." She looked at the warehouse through night vision, green outlines of men gesturing, one seated, one with a gun raised. "Mark," she said. From 4 directions, flashlights snapped on and doors crashed open. The walls that had hidden so much for so long finally had to let the light in. The men who had kicked in a black man's door at 2 in the morning, thinking they controlled every inch of the board, were about to learn they had been the ones surrounded all along. by neighbors who refused to look away, by federal agents who had listened to every word, and most of all, by the consequences of the choices they had made long before that night. The takedown at Pier 19 did not look like TV. It was messier and quieter all at once. After the flashbang smoke cleared and the shouting settled into commands, the warehouse turned into a photograph. Brian knew he would remember for the rest of his life. Rodriguez on his knees, fingers laced on top of his head, face slack with shock. Wilson sitting against the cold concrete wall, one arm pinned behind him in federal steel, blood from a graze on his shoulder soaking his sleeve. Collins, Hayes, Brennan lined up beside them, backs against a backdrop of rusted cruisers and forgotten patrol lights. A federal agent stood over each man, reading from the same script they had all known by heart for years. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. They had recited those words to gang members in alleys, to addicts in motel rooms, to kids who could not stop shaking. Hearing them now with their own names attached landed like a dark joke with no laughter. Wilson stared at the floor while the rights were read. His mind flicked to Brian on the living room floor in Henderson, cheek on hardwood, his own voice barking orders. In some deep part of him, he understood that this was not just an arrest. It was an answer. 6 months later, the warehouse was cleaner, the air conditioned, the law wrapped in wood and marble. The federal courtroom in Las Vegas was packed. Reporters, community advocates, cops in plain clothes, casino lawyers. In the middle rows, a cluster of older Henderson residents sat together like a church group. Martha Patterson clutched her purse strap with both hands. At the front, Brian sat in the witness section, a thick file on his lap. His suit was dark, his tie simple, his posture straight. From a distance, he looked like every other career Fed who had spent half his life in courtrooms. Up close, the faint line scars on his wrists and the way he flinched when the heavy doors banged shut told a fuller story. He had just come off the stand after hours of testimony about wiretaps and bank records and internal codes. Now he watched from the side as the judge shuffled sentencing documents and the defendants rose one by one. Captain Miguel Rodriguez, the judge said, voice carrying through the room like a bell, for your role in orchestrating a criminal conspiracy under the color of law, for accepting bribes, obstructing justice, and participating in the kidnapping of a federal officer, this court sentences you to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. A low shock ran through the gallery. The camera crews leaned forward. In the second row, behind the defense table, Rodriguez's wife closed her eyes. His teenage son stared straight ahead, jaw clenched, cheeks wet. Detective Frank Wilson, the judge continued, for assaulting and kidnapping a federal officer, for threatening his life, for your participation in an ongoing racketeering enterprise, this court likewise sentences you to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Wilson did not look back at his family. He kept his eyes on the defense table. His lawyer touched his arm, but he could not feel it. Somewhere far away, he heard a younger version of himself saying, "This is my city," and realized how small that sounded in a room where the seal over the bench said something larger than any jurisdiction he had ever claimed. The camera lenses found his wife anyway, caught the moment her shoulders shook, the way their grown daughter put an arm around her like she was the child now. Viewers at home argued later about who to feel sorry for in that frame. When court recessed, Martha and the neighbors shuffled out into the hallway, past microphones and lights. A reporter stuck a mic toward her. "Why was it important for you to be here, Mom?" "Because we saw it," she answered simply. "We saw what they did to him. If the system was finally going to do right by Brian, then the least we could do was sit here and look those men in the eye while it did." Back in a quieter corridor, Brian checked his phone. There was a new message from Emma, waiting in Phoenix and watching clips between classes. "Dad, I saw you on TV again. My friends know now. Some said they would be scared if their dad did what you do. I told them I am scared too. But I am proud. I just want you to come home." He read it twice, thumb hovering over the screen. For years, he had let her believe he fixed computers and sat in boring meetings. Now she had the whole picture. Her father hunted corrupt cops and came home with bruises he did not always explain. Pride and fear lived side by side in every sentence she sent. He typed back, choosing each word slowly. "My job is to make sure the people with the most power answer to someone. That includes me. I will be careful. I love you more than any badge." He slipped the phone back into his pocket and realized that careful meant something different now. It used to mean keeping his head down in undercover roles, blending into suburbs, trusting that if he played his part, the institution would cover his back. Now it meant checking the peephole twice before he opened the door to his own apartment, even when he was sure it was just a neighbor. It meant that every unexpected knock after dark made his heart spasm before his training caught up. He still had a badge. He still had authority. But the idea of home as a fortress had cracked the night a boot came through the door he paid the mortgage on. The spotlight did not go away when the case closed. He sat on panels about police reform, testified before committees, did interviews where anchors asked him to explain again and again how a man with his rank could end up face down on his own floor. Sometimes on late-night talk shows, the hosts tried to crack jokes to ease the audience. Bet they picked the wrong house that night. Chief Brian would smile for the camera, but his eyes would drift for a second, remembering the splintered wood, the smell of fear that was not his. Back in his cell, far from the cameras, Frank Wilson sat on the lower bunk and watched a strip of sky through reinforced glass. The sounds at night were different. Here, no radio chatter, no sirens, no dispatch, just the murmur of other men in other cages and the occasional echo of a steel door closing. He replayed the beginning of it all more than the end. The weight of his boot hitting Brian's door, the surge of power when the frame gave way, the words that had come out of his mouth by habit. Police, open up. This is my city. Now, when guards walked past his cell, they barely glanced in. To them, he was an inmate like any other, a number on a chart. The city he had once claimed moved on without him, using his name in training videos and op-eds as a warning about what happened when those with guns started believing the rules were for other people. Some doors, he understood too late, did more than open when you kicked them. They closed behind you in ways you could never undo. Once you choose to break a threshold like that, there is no path that leads back to who you were before your foot left the ground. By the time the desert heat settled back, over Henderson, the house on Sunrise Lane did not look like a crime scene anymore. The door had been replaced, the frame repainted. A young couple had moved in, both of them actually working in tech, laptops glowing late into the night where Brian's carefully staged cover life used to hum. On morning walks, Martha and the other older neighbors still slowed as they passed. The new owners had hung a cheerful welcome sign on the porch. Above it, a slim black eye watched the street. They put in a ring camera, Martha said, almost to herself. Can you blame them? Her friend replied. Sometimes the new wife would be out watering a few potted plants, and Martha would stop to say hello. You know, she would begin gently. This house. A few months back, the police kicked the door in on a black man who lived here. He worked in law enforcement. Turned out, this was the place where a whole system showed its face. The young woman would blink, look at the smooth door, then at the older woman's steady gaze. I saw something about that online, she would say. I did not know it was this house. The Homeowners Association bylaws had changed too. At the next annual meeting, tucked between noise complaints and parking rules, there was a new section about security technology. Cameras were encouraged, but so were clear policies about how police entered the neighborhood, how footage was shared, what cooperation meant. The language was dry, but the message underneath was sharp. These cameras are here to protect the people who live behind these doors, not to help threaten them. In Phoenix, in a classroom that still smelled faintly of markers and teenage sweat, Emma Davis stood at the front with a sheet of paper in her hands. The assignment was simple. Write about a moment that changed the way you see the world. She had written about seeing her father on TV, flat against the floor of a living room she knew better than anyone in that class. At first, I thought it was just another video she read aloud. Another black man on the ground with cops on top of him. My friends were mad. Then they swiped away. Then I realized it was my dad. I had to decide if I was going to look away too. She wrote about how she had wanted to be a cop when she was younger because her father was in law enforcement. Now, she said, she thought maybe she wanted to be a civil rights lawyer or an investigator like him, not to chase revenge, but to make sure fewer people had to learn about their loved ones from a news clip. I do not want to kick down doors, she wrote. I want to make sure we know what is on the other side before we ever touch the handle. When Brian read the essay later, sitting at his kitchen table after another long day of briefings and meetings, his hands shook a little. He had always known the job would draw blood from somewhere. He had not counted on how much of the cost would be paid by the kids watching from living rooms and classrooms, forced to grow up around words like corruption and misconduct. In Vegas, the town hall was standing room only. White hair, black hair, shaved heads, braids, retired nurses, casino dealers, off-duty officers in plain clothes. People who would not have been in the same room 6 months earlier now sat elbow to elbow, microphones passing down the aisles as a panel talked about police accountability. Near the back, a man with a veteran's cap and a face browned by years of Nevada sun stood up. He cleared his throat, voice rough. I've always been the guy who says if you are not doing anything wrong, you have nothing to be afraid of when the police show up, he admitted. That was my line. Said it to my kids. Said it to my grandkids. He glanced around the room, eyes landing for a moment on Martha, then on Brian at the front. But that night, on Sunrise Lane, I watched a man who was not doing anything wrong have his door kicked in because some folks decided their suspicion was all the paperwork they needed. That was enough for me to realize we are going to need something stronger than blind faith if we want this to work. A few heads nodded. A few people stared at the floor. Some of the oldest viewers at home would see themselves in him more than in anybody else. Later that week, in a mid-level hotel just off the Strip, Brian stood at his window and looked out at the lights. Las Vegas glowed like it always did, as if nothing fundamental had changed. Down on the carpeted conference floors, they had just finished another summit on reform, panels and action plans and promises. He no longer believed the system would automatically correct itself because of memos or policies. The machine would keep moving the way it always had unless people inside and outside it chose, daily, to put their hands on the gears. He thought about Sarah Johnson, still in the field, willing to push back at her own bosses when they wanted to trade his life for a cleaner case. He thought about Luis Martinez, who had risked his badge and maybe his life by turning his gun on the men he worked beside. He thought about Martha holding her phone out at 2 a.m. and refusing to go back inside when she was told. Those were the people he trusted now, not the seal on the wall, not the weight of the badge by itself. The ones who refused to look away just because looking away would be easier. Out past the glass, a siren wailed briefly, then faded into the buzz of the city. Brian rested his forehead against the cool pane and let the thought settle that he had been trying not to say out loud. That night, those officers pounded on a black man's door, believing they were there to teach him a lesson about fear and respect. The real lesson was for them, and for everyone who had spent years insisting that power did not need anyone watching over it. Some knocks on a door make you jump for a few seconds. Others, like the ones that shook Sunrise Lane at 2 a.m, keep echoing in the conscience of a neighborhood and a country for years. If this story rang true for you, if it reminded you of something you have seen on your own street or on your own screen, do not let it stop when the credits roll. Share it. Talk about it. Ask the hard questions in your own town hall, in your own living room. And if you want more stories that refuse to look away from what happens when badges and bias collide, stay with us. Like the video, add your voice in the comments, and subscribe so you are here for the next story. Because the more of us who are willing to stand at the window and keep the cameras rolling, the fewer doors get kicked in without someone answering back.